"I can't just die, Doctor. Do something!" Jerry screamed, gripping Dr. Mark's lab coat tightly, his fingers trembling. Dr. Mark looked at him with a mixture of pity and helplessness. "I'm sorry, Jerry, but there's nothing I can do," he said softly, his voice tinged with sorrow. Jerry slumped back onto his hospital bed, his head bent in agony as the weight of the truth sank in. The sterile hospital room felt colder now, the white walls seeming to close in on him. "This is not the end for you yet, Jerry. We can still try new researched medicines, but I am truly sorry. Dr. Mark continued, trying to offer a sliver of hope, though his heart was heavy with the reality of the situation. Jerry's eyes watered as he turned his gaze toward the doctor. "How many months do I have left?" 10 months, Dr. Mark replied gently, his voice almost a whisper. Jerry's heart sank. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. It was a cruel fate, a disease that slowly took away the body's ability to move, to speak, to breathe, and ultimately to live. 10 months, Jerry muttered, trying to process the words, but the numbers seemed to blur in his mind. 10 months, too short a time to make up for everything he'd left behind. "You can stay with us so we will be able to monitor everything and see how far we can come," Dr. Mark said, his tone offering a slight comfort, though it was clear that there was little left that could truly help Jerry now. Jerry's eyes remained fixed on the floor, the weight of his diagnosis sinking deeper into his soul. "What are my chances?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Doctor," Mark paused before answering, his gaze dropping as if searching for the right words. "Only a miracle can save you," he said, his voice heavy with the truth that both he and Jerry knew all too well. Jerry bent his head again, a wave of despair washing over him. "If this doesn't work, what should I expect?" he asked quietly, already dreading the answer. Dr. Mark took a deep breath, steeling himself to explain the inevitable. "With ALS, the symptoms will only worsen over time. Within a few months, you'll begin to lose more control over your muscles first. It'll be your hands and legs, making it hard to walk or grasp things. Then your ability to speak will fade. You'll struggle to communicate, and soon, even swallowing will become difficult. The muscles that control your breathing will weaken, and you'll eventually require a ventilator to breathe." Jerry's chest tightened as he tried to process Dr. Mark's words. The road ahead was terrifying, each milestone marking another step closer to the end. "Most patients at this stage," Dr. Mark continued, "don't survive past a year. The body, over time, just shuts down. It's gradual, but it's relentless. It will be a long, painful road, Jerry. And if you reach that final stage, we won't be able to stop it." Jerry closed his eyes tightly, trying to block out the images in his mind of what was to come. His fingers clenched into fists as he fought to hold onto the small thread of hope that still remained. "How do I have this sickness and never felt it until now?" Jerry questioned, his voice filled with disbelief. He struggled to understand how something so life-altering could have been silently taking over his body without warning. Dr. Mark leaned forward slightly, his expression sympathetic but serious. "That's a common question, Jerry," he began, his voice steady. "Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, is tricky because it often develops slowly, and in the early stages, the symptoms can be subtle, so subtle that most people don't notice them. In fact, it's usually not until the disease has progressed significantly that the symptoms become impossible to ignore." Jerry's brows furrowed as he tried to wrap his mind around the idea. "So I could have had this for years and not known?" "Yes," Dr. Mark replied. "It's possible. ALS typically begins with mild muscle weakness or twitching, things that could easily be attributed to other causes like fatigue or stress. People might just think it's normal wear and tear on the body. As the disease progresses, though, the muscle weakness worsens, and the person starts to notice trouble with coordination, balance, and even speaking or swallowing." He paused, searching Jerry's eyes for understanding. The key is that the early symptoms are so gradual that they often go unnoticed. It's not until the disease starts affecting the larger muscle groups like the arms, legs, or even the chest that people start to feel its effects in a significant way. But by then, the damage is already in motion and the disease is hard to reverse. Jerry's face tightened as he took in the explanation. The idea of something so insidious slowly eating away at his body without any obvious signs felt both frightening and maddening. So, all this time, I've been living with it and I never even knew? Dr. Mark nodded. I'm afraid so. Halls is cruel like that. You're not alone in your experience, Jerry. Many patients come to us with the same shock and disbelief. But the disease doesn't work quickly in its early stages, and by the time it becomes noticeable, it's often too late for a cure. I would love to stay home and go through this treatment here. If I'm really going to die, then I would rather do it in my own bed, Jerry said, his voice soft but firm. I respect that, Dr. Mark replied, nodding as he completed the discharge papers. As Jerry stepped out of the doctor's office, his driver was waiting. The ride back home was quiet, and Jerry couldn't shake the weight of what he had just been told. His heart felt heavy, and his thoughts were filled with a swirl of emotions. He thought about all the years he had spent building his business. From the very bottom, he had worked tirelessly, pushing through every challenge that came his way. He had fought, sacrificed, and given everything to create the empire he now owned. But now, to be facing this, his health failing him, was more than he could bear. At 40 years old, he found himself unmarried, with no one to share his wealth, his struggles, or even this moment of crisis. As Jerry stepped inside his house, the first person he encountered was Clara, his longtime maid. She had been with him through many seasons, always there to take care of things. She smiled brightly, unaware of the storm that had just hit Jerry's life. "Welcome, sir. What would you like for dinner?" Clara asked cheerfully, her voice light and pleasant. Jerry stared at her for a moment, her innocence reminding him of the small things he had often taken for granted. He sighed deeply, his mind still swirling with everything he had just heard. "Let the table be filled up," he said quietly, his voice tinged with finality. If this was truly the end, if he was really going to die, then he would go out enjoying everything he had deprived himself of. All the good foods he had skipped, all the indulgences he had avoided in the name of work and success today, he would have them all. Every bite would be a reminder of everything he had built and everything he had lost. Clara finished laying the table, her hands moving quickly as she arranged the dishes she had prepared. There was a load of feast, really. She knew Jerry had always been a man who liked to eat well, even if he hadn't indulged in his favorite dishes in years. As she placed the last dish on the table, she wiped her hands on her apron and went to Jerry's room to call him. She knocked gently before pushing the door open. Inside, Jerry was sitting on the edge of his bed, his face partly hidden as he wiped away a tear. When he saw Clara, he quickly smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He stood up slowly, his body stiff, but he tried to hide the heaviness that seemed to weigh him down. "Let's go," he said quietly, his voice betraying the exhaustion he felt. He followed her down the hallway toward the dining room. Clara led him to the table, where everything was ready. The warm, delicious aroma of the food filled the air, but Jerry's mood was far from the joy one might expect with such a meal before them. He sat down first, then gestured for Clara to join him. "Sit, Clara," Jerry said, his voice soft but determined. "I can't possibly finish all this alone." Clara sat down opposite him, the two of them staring at the spread of food. They began to eat in silence, the only sounds, the clinking of utensils and the occasional sigh from Jerry. After a few moments, Jerry broke the silence, his voice quiet but filled with a strange seriousness. "Clara," he called, his gaze fixed on his plate for a moment before looking up at her. "If you were given just 10 days to live, and you were in my shoes, what would you do?" The question came out of nowhere, and Clara paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. She wasn't sure how to answer at first. The suddenness of it took her by surprise. But then, looking at Jerry's tired face, she understood. He was asking because he didn't want to face this alone. She put her fork down slowly, thinking carefully before answering. Clara looked at Jerry for a moment, her eyes softening as she saw the weight of his question. She had known him for years. She had seen his determination, his strength, and his constant drive. But now, in the stillness of the room, she saw a man who was grappling with something much bigger than business deals or deadlines. 10 days, she murmured, her voice thoughtful. If I only had 10 days to live, and I were in your shoes, I think I would spend them differently. I would try to make peace with myself, with all the things I've put off, the things I never said or did. She paused, her hands resting in her lap as she reflected on her own life. She wasn't a rich woman, nor had she built an empire like Jerry, but she knew that time was precious and how easily it could slip away without notice. I'd stop running, stop working for things that don't matter in the end. I'd take those 10 days to be with the people who truly matter, the ones I care about. Maybe even try to make a few things right, you know. She glanced at him, her face gentle. I'd want to be remembered for the good I did, not just the work I did. Jerry looked at her, the heaviness in his chest lifting just a little. Her words were simple, yet they struck something deep inside him. Jerry stared at Clara, his gaze lingering a little longer than usual. Her soft lips, the way her eyes sparkled even in the dim light, and the way her hair cascaded gently over her shoulder, all of it seemed to draw him in. In that moment, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge before. He wanted love. Truly, deeply, he wanted to be loved and to love in return. He had spent so much of his life focused on success, on building his empire, that he had never truly given love a chance. The only person he had ever truly loved was his late mother, and now she was gone. Her absence left an emptiness he couldn't fill with work or wealth. He reached for the bottle of wine, pouring it into 2 tumblers. The rich, red liquid sloshed in the glasses as he handed one to Clara. Cheers to living my best life, Jerry said with a bittersweet smile, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Clara, clearly still processing everything, raised her glass and offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Congratulations, sir, she replied, her tone lighter than before. Jerry took a long sip, feeling the warmth spread through him. He continued pouring, the alcohol seeming to take away some of the sharp edges of his thoughts. Clara, too, seemed to be fighting her own battles, and the more they drank, the more the walls between them began to fall away. She didn't stop drinking, not even when the conversation turned a little lighter, a little more carefree. By the time the wine bottle was empty, both of them were far from sober. Yet there was an ease between them now, as if they had known each other far longer than just this evening. They began to talk and laugh like old friends, the room filled with their voices as they shared stories and memories, both of them finding comfort in the chaos of their lives. Clara, you won't believe it, Jerry suddenly said, his voice more relaxed than before, a laugh bubbling up from deep inside him. I just have 10 months to live. Clara's face froze for a moment, her brow furrowed as she processed his words. Then she let out a loud laugh, shaking her head. "Haha, that's not possible. You're joking, right?" Jerry chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm serious. I was just told today." He paused, then added with a grin, "This is my first time ever taking so much drink." Clara laughed too, though her eyes held a mix of concern and amusement. "Well, I hope it's not your last," she teased, her voice a little tipsy but still warm. "Let me take you to your room," Clara said, getting up from the table as she noticed how unsteady Jerry was on his feet. She moved to help him stand, her hand steadying him as he tried to gain his balance. They both staggered to his room, laughter mixed with slight stumbles as they leaned on each other for support. When they finally reached the bed, they both collapsed into it, their bodies giving way to the exhaustion and alcohol that had taken over. "Clara, can I kiss you?" Jerry asked, his voice soft as they both adjusted. Clara now standing by his bed. Clara nodded, a subtle smile forming as Jerry leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips. "Clara, can I do more?" he asked, his eyes brimming with desire. Clara paused, her gaze lingering on him for a moment before she leaned in closer. Without saying much, she communicated everything her eyes, spoke of things unsaid, emotions unspoken, a complexity too deep for words. There was something profound in the silence, a shared understanding in the space between them. The next morning, Jerry woke first, Clara still curled up beside him. He knew what had happened, and despite everything, he had no regrets. Clara, too ashamed to meet his gaze, quietly slipped away while Jerry pretended to sleep. The day passed slowly. Jerry stayed home, his doctor Mark coming over to administer an injection and set up his bed rest. The machines hummed as he lay there, occasionally smiling, with Clara the only thing on his mind. He replayed the night in his head, how he had pleaded and how she had agreed. But deep down he feared her consent had been tainted by alcohol, that she might regret it once sober. "Jerry, you're doing well. I'll be back this evening to remove the machines and then we'll continue tomorrow," Dr. Mark said, bringing Jerry back to reality. "Thank you, Mark. Please call Clara and my driver on your way out," Jerry replied. Dr. Mark smiled, impressed by how Jerry was slowly getting stronger. Just yesterday, Jerry had been broken by the news, but today he sounded more stable. Dr. Mark gathered his things, then called Clara and the driver. Clara walked in, her steps hesitant at first. When she saw Jerry lying in bed connected to machines, she froze. She couldn't believe it. In all the 6 years she had worked for him, she had never seen him so sick. Her heart raced as memories of the night before rushed back. What he had asked her then haunted her, but she couldn't bring herself to say anything. "What are we having for breakfast?" Jerry asked, trying to sound casual as he smiled at her. "Whatever you like, sir," Clara replied, her voice quiet. "Then can I have you?" Jerry said, chuckling lightly. Clara and the driver exchanged a glance, her face turning red. She suddenly coughed to cover the awkwardness. "I mean, can I have what you're having?" "What do you have?" Jerry corrected himself quickly. "We have everything, sir," Clara answered, her voice steady now. "Make me tea and pancakes, then." "Thanks, Clara," he said, closing his eyes for a moment as he relaxed. He then instructed the driver to go pick up some files for him from work before he closed his eyes again, preparing to rest. Clara and the driver left to handle their tasks, each going off to do their separate errands. Clara stood in the kitchen, her mind racing. The sound of the kettle boiling barely registered as her thoughts spiraled. She couldn't stop thinking about Jerry, about the machines connected to him, about his condition, and what had happened the night before. Her heart fluttered at the memory, but she quickly pushed it aside. She had never seen him like this. Strong, confident, always in control, yet here he was, lying in bed, vulnerable and attached to machines. Clara wondered what had brought him to this point. He had never been sick before. And then there was last night. His words echoed in her mind. "Can I have you?" She shivered, uncertain of what he truly meant. Was it just the alcohol? Was it something he had said in the heat of the moment? Or did he truly mean it? Clara couldn't make sense of it. She had always been just his assistant, always professional. But last night, things had felt different. She had felt something deep, and now she couldn't escape it. What was she to him now? She wasn't sure. In all the years she had worked for him, she had always admired him from a distance, never imagining that things could change. But now, she wasn't so sure. Was she just someone to take care of him while he was sick? Or was there something more to it? Her hands trembled as she set the pancake mix down and began to pour the tea. She tried to steady herself, but the questions swelled in her mind, each one more confusing than the last. She needed to focus on the task at hand, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Jerry and the uncertainty of what came next. Clara carefully placed the tray of food on a small table beside Jerry's bed. The tea was still steaming and the pancakes were stacked neatly, but as she stood there, she felt her heart racing again. She tried to steady her hands, but the tremble wouldn't stop. Jerry glanced up at her, his voice soft. "Clara, could you feed me? I can't really do it myself with all these machines connected." Clara froze for a moment. For a second, she felt like the world had paused. She had spent so many years looking after him, but never like this. She was his assistant, his right-hand person, but this was different. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, and it made her chest tighten. Her hands shook as she lifted a fork, scooping a piece of pancake. She brought it to his lips, her breath hitching. He opened his mouth, accepting the bite, and their eyes met for a brief second. Clara felt a wave of heat rush through her, but she couldn't understand why. She had done this many times before for other people, but this felt different. Her professional composure was slipping away, and she couldn't make sense of what was happening to her. She looked away quickly, trying to regain control, but it was hard when he was looking at her like Thathis eyes, filled with something she couldn't name. Jerry, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to her inner turmoil, or perhaps he was too focused on the moment. He ate slowly, his gaze still locked on hers as she fed him. It felt intimate, in a way neither of them had expected. The silence between them was thick, filled with things unsaid, emotions neither of them knew how to navigate. Clara tried to push the thoughts away. She was here to take care of him, nothing more. But deep down she knew something was shifting, something neither of them could deny. She continued feeding him, her hand trembling ever so slightly with each bite. Each time their eyes met, it became harder to ignore the tension building between them. Neither knew what was happening or what would come next, but it was clear that something had changed, and neither was quite ready to face it. Clara finished feeding Jerry, her hands still trembling despite her best efforts to control them. She set the tray aside, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer than necessary. She could feel the weight of the silence between them, but she didn't know how to break it. Jerry, as if sensing her hesitation, broke the quiet. "Clara," he began, his voice soft but steady, Would you go to the beach with me this evening?" Clara looked up, startled by the question. She hadn't expected that. She knew he was recovering, but the beach? She couldn't help but feel a little confused. Was he asking as an employer, or was this something more personal? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of his intentions. "The beach?" she echoed, her voice a little shaky. "But, Jerry, you're still recovering. You should rest." Jerry gave her a small smile, the kind that seemed to hold more weight than it should. "I know, but the fresh air might do me good. I've been stuck in this room long enough." "Watch out for part 2.